to start. We'll talk about code or whatever we'll talk about today. It's about to start, so please hang tight while I check that everything is okay. Sound check, camera check, lights check. How's my hair? Oh, wait, I don't have any hair. Maybe put some pants on and I am good to go. So get ready wherever you are, 'cause this stream is about to start. Get ready wherever you are, 'cause this stream is about to start. Hi, my name is Leonard Facchinetti, and let's write some code together, shall we? What we have on the menu today is to revisit an old application of mine called Kill the Newsletter. What's that about? Well, I have been trying to diversify a little bit what I have been doing on the channel, because I have been doing live streams about live coding, about audio processing and audio effects in Reaper almost exclusively this year. But that doesn't represent all my interests. I'm also interested in web development and other things. Yeah, we have talked about C++, we have talked about electronics, but I thought it would be interesting to talk about web development again. And typically I pick up one project and I try to stick to it. Not very well, but I try to. But because audio stuff and web development is kind of two different worlds, and I think that it appeals to different people, what I will be doing moving forward is I will try to alternate between web development and audio stuff. Also, I have been trying my hand at shorts. So if you are into that kind of content, then you can check 2 shorts that I made on this channel. See if you like them, see if you like this kind of content. It is very different from my usual live stream, in which I take my time and do everything as slowly as I can, explaining everything that I'm doing. In the shorts, I am very fast-paced. I speak about 220 words in 1 minute. And I try to convey one idea about, in this case, audio. So I did one short about oversampling and one short about cramping in terms of filters at high frequencies. But that's not what we are here for today. Today we are here for something completely different. Before I get to that, Mage is here. Hello, what's up? Thanks for joining me. I'm starting to like PNPM a lot. Interesting, maybe I will check that out. For those who don't know, what I am going to be doing today is to write some Node.js. And NPM is the package manager that most people tend to use, because it is the package manager that comes with a vanilla Node.js installation. But there is also PNPM, which is an alternative to that, that promises to solve some problems. I guess probably the most prominent one being the fact that your node modules are installed in a node modules folder. The packages from NPM are installed in a folder that can be huge. As your dependencies grow and grow, that directory can balloon to an absurd size. This tries to avoid that. But I haven't really played with this, so I've never had an issue actually. I think I don't tend to work in big enough projects that actually need this. My projects tend to be rather small, I think. So I never ran into that kind of problem. And yeah, Vite, that's module bundler. We will not be using Vite today. We will be using a different module bundler. We will be using something that Vite relies on, but I don't think we'll be using Vite. I have looked into it. I don't think it's my cup of tea. Like PNPM, I think it's solving a problem that I don't necessarily have. Cypress is a testing tool, works by simulating what the browser does. I also don't think we are going to be using that. And Svelte, we are not going to be using that either. We are not going to be using any of those tools. But it's good that you bring them up. But I have either other tools that I prefer, or I don't have the kind of problem that the tool is trying to solve. Or in the case of Svelte, I sort of created something of my own that sort of fills that space that Svelte is filling, and I prefer my tools better. So that's what we'll be looking at, my tools. Well, anyway, I want to tell you the story of Q the newsletter before we get into all of this and any of this. So Q the newsletter is an application that solves a problem I had many years ago. It's actually a very old application at this point. I wanted to subscribe to some content, some newsletters, but I didn't want them to be in my email. I wanted the content. I didn't want the delivery method. I understand why some people do that kind of thing when they only have the content available via a newsletter, because that way you get to know your audience better. You get to know who they are, and you can communicate with them in different ways, which is all great. But I didn't want to receive that content in that way. I wanted to use an RSS feed reader. An RSS feeder is a good one. RSS feed reader, because that's how I was consuming my news and my entertainment back then. And I tried to find something that would convert from email to RSS feeds. I couldn't find anything. So I created this thing. And since then, there are other tools in the market. I guess probably the most famous one at this point is Feedly. I think it's a paid feature, but if you pay for Feedly, you get access to this feature where they give you an email inbox. Anything that is sent to that will turn into an RSS feed entry, or I guess in other words, would appear in the RSS feed reader along with everything else that you subscribe to. So I'm no longer using Q the newsletter because I no longer use RSS feed readers. These days, I consume most of my news and entertainment from other sources, for instance, here on YouTube. So I don't use Q the newsletter anymore. But it turns out to be my most popular project. From everything I have done on the web, from all my open source projects, all these live streams, everything that I have done on the web, Q the newsletter is still the most popular. Probably because it has been around for longer. Typically, my projects tend to spring into life, and then at some point, I sunset them. But Q the newsletter, for one reason or another, I kept around. So it is the most starred project I have on GitHub. It is probably what has brought me most supporters in terms of patrons and PayPal support and that kind of thing. It's an application that people like. It's so small, it's so simple, and yet many people like it. And it has been to the top of Hacker News for one day, a couple hours, I don't know, but it has been to the top of the Hacker News page, and it wasn't even posted by me. I think I posted it, didn't get any traction. Someone else posted it much later, got some good comments there. Generally, people tend to like Q the newsletter. Perhaps I should explain what it is, but let me say hello to Bo. Hey, Bo. How are you doing? It's great to see you here. So let's take a brief moment to go over what Q the newsletter does, and I can show you how it works. And then we will talk about what I want to work on. So it's this simple application. You are going to subscribe to email newsletters, and you're going to receive that content as entries in some Atom feed that you can subscribe using a feed reader like Feedly and many others. So you just give your inbox a name. That's going to be the title of the Atom feed. And then Kill the Newsletter is going to give you both an email address as well as an URL to an Atom feed. You're going to use this email address to subscribe to the newsletter at the publisher's website. So you go to your favorite newsletter, you subscribe with this email address, and you go to your Atom feed reader and you subscribe to this Atom feed. And I'm going to be using the words RSS and Atom interchangeably, even though they are not the same thing. Technically speaking, it is an Atom feed, but many people know RSS better than they know Atom. They are not interchangeable, they are not the same standard, but they are pretty much equivalent for all intents and purposes that we are going to deal with. Anyhow, after you have done all this setup, any email that is sent to this inbox will, of course, arrive at the Kill the Newsletter application, and it will be put into this feed as a new entry. And that's all there is to it. It is pretty much like an email reader of sorts, except that the delivery method is weird. You don't go to gmail.com and you see your inbox. You don't go to your mail.app in macOS and you see your inbox. Instead, you receive that content via RSS. That's what it does. And it is mostly working. It has been working well for the past, I think, 8 years. It has been working very well for the past 8 years. And as I said, it's relatively popular. So it is pretty widely used, actually. There are many people using this. There are many newsletters in here. Of course, I will not show you any statistics because I don't have any statistics because I don't collect that kind of data on my users. So I don't know who they are. I don't know how many inboxes they have. I don't know how many feed entries they have. I don't have any interest in collecting that kind of information. If I wanted to, perhaps I could go into the database for the application and try to get some of this information, but I don't do that. And what is this, by the way? Are you trying to say, okay, symlinks. So I suppose that PNPM works by creating symlinks instead of directories. That's what I'm reacting to, by the way. These messages. That's what I understand from this. Anyway, another thing about Kill the Newsletter, and probably one of the reasons why I keep it running, besides the popularity, is that it has been an awesome test bed for different technologies. From time to time, I am interested in a different programming language. I'm interested in a new framework, a new tool, a new web server, a new shiny new toy. Kill the Newsletter is the perfect test bed for that because it is not trivial. I mean, we have to receive email, we have to clean data up because it is widely used and we don't have infinite disk space, so we have to clean things up. So there are some background jobs to do that. It is a web server, so there are all these interesting aspects to the application. Even though it's a single page, it's just one form with one input, I would consider it non-trivial. Of course, it's not terribly complicated. It's, I guess, 300 lines of code, something like that. But it's not trivial either because of all these infrastructure aspects. And because I have many users, it is kind of expensive to pay for bandwidth. As it turns out, the server costs that accumulate the most, that are the most expensive, is the bandwidth. So because of pricing of servers and because of the technologies and everything, it is kind of non-trivial. You have to think hard about how you're going to set things up so that everything works and it doesn't cost a whole lot. Right now, it costs me around 20 euros per month to keep this up. And I think that after the changes we are going to make, we will be able to cut some of these costs. Is there a We Love Leandro newsletter? I guess there is. Go to the link in the description. You will go to my website and find the Discord. The Discord server where we hang out. That's the We Love Leandro newsletter, I suppose. Anyway, as I was saying, it is a great test bed for different technologies. Originally, Kill the Newsletter was implemented in Ruby, I think. I think it was implemented in Ruby on Rails. Then I switched it to Sinatra. At some point, I probably switched it back to Ruby on Rails because I wanted to try using different services. So I used SendGrid to receive email. I used Amazon S3 to store the newsletters. And then I switched it again and I implemented it in other languages, I think. I don't remember at this point, actually. I implemented Kill the Newsletter in many languages. Right now, it is using the... Actually, let's check this. Here on the GitHub page, there are some tags, and I think I tagged every version. I think I did it. I'm not sure I did it, but I think I did it. I think that after I decided that, okay, I am implementing this right now in Ruby on Rails, I want to try Sinatra. I think I tagged the Ruby on Rails branch and then switched to Sinatra. So I think that I have a history of every technology I have ever used in the project. So let's view all tags. And yeah, oh, they are ordered by date. Are they? If they're doing that, that's awesome. It seems like it's ordered by date. And I don't trust this number because it says 2017. I think that this has been running for longer. I think that the first implementation was around 2015, and I probably didn't keep that part of the history. I may be wrong, I don't remember the exact dates, but I feel like this has been going for 7 years at this point, or around 8 years. Anyway, I implemented this as a standalone app, probably in Ruby on Rails. I want to say, can I see the code for that tag? Oh, it's not Ruby on Rails. It is Go. So this was a Go implementation. Yep, it was implemented in Go at some point. Then I switched it to this service-oriented approach where I have all this software as a service doing different things like receiving email, and the host was Heroku at that point. And this was in Ruby. But it was in Sinatra, his smaller hammer, through that. So then I implemented it in Go again. It appears that I implemented it in Go again. Then Rails, then Sinatra, and at this point it's Node.js. Yeah, as you can see, I implemented this a couple times. It is a great little application. It's not trivial, but it's also not so difficult that you cannot do it. It's like 300 lines of code. You can translate that to a different language. You can set things up. You'll be on your way in a couple days. Usually the most difficult part is migrating the old data that I cannot leave behind because people are using this, so I cannot just delete the database. Okay, so it is implemented in Node.js right now because I have been working in Node.js in my day job. It is the language that I understand and I like, JavaScript. I think it's a pretty cool language. Despite all the negativity around JavaScript, I still think it is an awesome language and an awesome ecosystem at large. I really like it. And we will not be switching from Node.js to something else. But something happened. Something very worrisome happened. And it was this issue report. Thank you to Aja Toledo for creating this issue report. So what they brought to my attention is that the infrastructure I am using to generate TLS certificates is failing. For a bit of context here, when you see HTTPS on an address and you see this little padlock, it means that you are running your website over an encrypted connection, such that no one in the middle between you and the Q&A newsletter server can read the contents of what's going on. So it's a standard these days. Almost every website is using HTTPS, and if not, then they should be. It doesn't provide a lot of security. It doesn't solve all the security problems in existence, but it is the bare minimum. It would not make sense to run anything without HTTPS these days. That's my stance. It doesn't make any sense to run anything without HTTPS. And for the padlock to work, for HTTPS to work, you have to have these TLS certificates. I will not get too much into the weeds of how they are issued and how they work. In a nutshell, you need to prove to an authority that you own this domain. There are different ways of verifying that you are entitled to a TLS certificate, but that's the way that we do it, and that's the way that most people do it. They just prove that they own the domain. So there is a little exchange between the Q&A newsletter server and this authority, the certificate authority. They need to communicate to say, hey, I want a TLS certificate. Yeah, sure. In order to have that, I need you to verify that you own the domain by trying these challenges. Oh, okay. I will go and fulfill the challenges. You challenged me to prove that I own the domain by putting a certain file in a certain location. I will go ahead and do that. And then the certificate authority says, okay, if I have verified that you own the domain, here is a certificate. And that certificate is this cryptographic object that is recognized by all the browsers, by everything that accesses the web. Ultimately, it gives you the little padlock. So there needs to be this conversation between the Q&A newsletter server and the certificate authority. And it seems as though the technology I had in place to do that setup is no longer working, which is to be expected because this has been going for 1 year, 2 years. I don't remember the last time I actually deployed this, but I can check. Has been around for more than 1 year at this point, and technology changes. Cryptographic protocols improve, and it seems like that's what happened because the package I was using called auto-encrypt. I was using on the Q&A newsletter server this auto-encrypt package that would talk to the certificate authority, which in this case is Let's Encrypt, and would negotiate the TLS certificate and would enable the padlock. But it seems like this package is trying to speak a language that this certificate authority no longer understands, so that no longer works. And Q&A newsletter is no longer able to get a certificate. That's terrible news, because it means that as soon as this existing certificate expires, we will lose the little padlock. And instead of seeing this, you will see a red warning saying, this connection may be compromised or whatever, when you try to access Q&A newsletter. So this is a devastating issue. Now, we could simply update this package. In fact, another person helpfully commented that if you update this package, this dependency, then everything will work. It will fix the issue because the new version of this package knows how to speak the new protocol required by Let's Encrypt. So if all we wanted was to fix this devastating issue, All we would need to do is to update the package, and hopefully nothing else would break along the way, because you know how these things go. Hopefully nothing else would break along the way, and we would have fixed the problem. But I think that at this point, Kill the Newsletter deserves a bit of love, so I'm not going to simply fix this issue. I'm going to give it a little bit of love. We will go over the application and update all the packages. Do another code review of this. I have done a code review about this application in the channel way back, but we are going to review it again and update some things to the latest way of doing things. We will be revising the architecture and doing some critical changes. For one thing, I am no longer that much into using this package for dealing with this problem of getting a certificate. I will get into the reasons as to why in a moment, but I am no longer into the package, so I'm going to migrate away from using this package. And there are some other features that we need to implement. We need to explain some things in the interface a little better, because right now the interface is a bit sparse. We explain sort of how to set things up, but we rely on people sort of understanding things. They need to understand how this whole process sort of works, which I don't think is terribly difficult, but I do receive the occasional email with people not understanding the setup, and particularly they don't understand that they need to verify their emails. That's a common thing for newsletters to do. In fact, it is good practice for newsletters to check that you really are interested in their content by clicking on a link on some email that they send you. But people don't really understand that they have to just follow the instructions here and sign up for everything, and then they will receive an email confirmation in their Atom feed, and that they have to click on that. And likewise, there are many other small wrinkles that people don't really understand, so we have to explain this better on the interface somehow. And there is one feature that we have to implement that is super cool. It's not a sexy feature, but it's so fun, at least for me it was. Because I created this because I wanted to sign up for newsletters using an Atom feed reader. But it turns out, and even back then when I was creating this, I found many tools that do the opposite. That instead of converting from emails to Atom feeds, they receive Atom feeds and send you an email. Anytime that there is a new entry on that Atom feed, they email you. For the kind of people who don't like to use RSS readers and do like receiving newsletters, those people exist. Now that's all fine and good, and I found many of those tools back then, and it was really frustrating because I wanted something to do the opposite and I couldn't find anything. But it turns out that what happens if you take Kill the Newsletter and combine it with one of those other tools? Then you take the Kill the Newsletter email address and you put that as the address that the other service should send an email to. See where I'm going? Anytime that we receive an email, we create an entry on the Atom feed which fires the other service to send us an email. It creates a loop. No one would do this with good intent, right? No one would create this loop with good intent, but there are many people out there who tried such a thing. And what happens is, on our side, not much, really. On our side, not much happens, because we are only receiving emails. And to receive emails is relatively okay, in the sense that there are many protections in place all over the internet to prevent spam. But they are always about sending the email. Because we're interested in receiving email, we don't ever get blocklisted anywhere. We don't have to worry about getting on the good side of the big email providers. It doesn't matter. No one is interested in dropping your email on the way out. They're always interested in dropping your email on the way in to prevent spam. Additionally, in terms of costs, server costs, you do pay for the data going out, but you tend to not have to pay for data coming in. That's usually the case. It isn't always the case, but it is the case, at least in the server that we are using now at DigitalOcean. So I have a quota for the amount of traffic that I can put out into the world. But if I remember correctly, I may be misremembering this, but as far as I remember, there is no cost for the data coming in. So receiving emails, send as many as you want. I don't care. What is expensive is to serve the Atom feeds. But when they reach a certain size, I will start dropping the old entries. So I keep the size of the Atom feed about the same. And therefore, I didn't notice this. I didn't notice this loop because the application was running just fine. Perhaps it was spending more time receiving that email and processing it, which is a bit of a CPU kind of work, but it's nothing major. Nothing like the person on the other side running the other service. That person over there was sending emails to me to queue the newsletter. And sending emails is much more expensive. You have to pay for an email provider that will relay that email for you if you want to guarantee or if you want to improve your chances on having your email delivered. You need to pay someone, one of the big email providers. You have to pay Google or Microsoft or Apple or Amazon, one of those. Really, you can count on one hand the amount of companies that you have to pay to. It's really very unfortunate, but that's how it is. So they had to pay for those outbound emails, and they had to pay probably for the data going out, the bandwidth going out. So they noticed the loop and they got in touch saying, hey, this is happening. On my side, I'm going to implement this block list and I'm going to block your service so that people cannot create the loop. And that's great. They did that. The loop stopped. No one was hurt. But on our side, we need to do the same, especially because there may be other services out there beyond just the one that this person who got in touch with me was running. There are other services like that, and we need some mechanism, some block list to prevent this kind of loop. Speaking of spam, let's deal with this person. Report that. And I think I will need to do that 3 times. That's annoying. Report. Okay. And report. Yeah. Thanks for being here. Have a good one. So that's the plan in a nutshell. We are going to revisit the Kill the Newsletter application to add a couple features like the block list, better explanations about things on the interface. We will be updating every package, and we will be taking another look at the infrastructure and the code base in general. That's what we're up to. Let's get started. This is the code base for Kill the Newsletter as it exists right now. And I tend to do these kinds of reviews and revisit an application after a long time. I tend to do that by trying to clean things up, and I tend to go from the outside in. There are different approaches for this. I tend to go from the silly little things on the outside and then finally get to the more interesting things in the middle of the application. So let's start with something very inconsequential, which is the configuration for TypeScript. I'm just going to toss this and copy the TypeScript configuration I have been using on my day job and in every other open source project that I have, and I will adapt the paths a little bit. On my day job, the infrastructure is a bit more complicated, so we don't need that kind of complication here. And then let's go over what these settings are doing. So we will do a little bit of a code review / verify if all of this makes sense for this application. So when you're doing TypeScript, the first thing is you have to set the inputs and outputs, the directory with your source code and the directory where you would want this to be at when it's built. So I suppose that this directory is something that I want to ignore on version control. Like that. And then there are these settings which are much more interesting to talk about. These settings are just 10 lines of code, but they probably took me something like 20 hours of reading to get to them. So I think that there is a lot of value into commenting on this. So I'm going to go over each and every line of this. I did not just simply copy and paste this from somewhere. I decided on each one of these settings. And I don't think that there is any other way besides just reading over all the documentation and understanding how everything works and deciding for yourself. But at least you can hear my decisions, and maybe that will inspire you when you're doing a TypeScript project. So first, what kind of module system are we using? And this is not the module system of the code that we are going to write. It is the module system of the code that TypeScript will generate. If you don't know what a module system is, in JavaScript, you have, in old JavaScript, back in the day, about 10 years ago, more than that, about 15 years ago, there was just one big script. You could separate it in multiple files and you would load all of them in the browser, and it would essentially be stitched together into one big script with one namespace. Every variable would be seen everywhere else. That, of course, is messy as your code base grows. It's fine for small scripts, but it's not fine for a big program. So people came up with the idea of modules. And there were like 5 concurrent ways of doing it. There were 5 different ways of doing the same thing, solving the problem in different ways. In Node.js, they went with something called require.js, I think was the name. I think the name was require.js. Common.js. Common.js. I guess it will be one of the options here. Yes, Common.js, I think, was the name. And that used to be the way that everyone did Node.js for about 10 years. But then the standard that defines what the JavaScript language even is in the first place came out with a standard way of doing modules. And now every tool that used to do its own little thing in its own little special different way is trying to convert and adapt to ECMAScript modules, to the standard. Of course, this transition introduces some backwards incompatibility and some pain on the whole ecosystem, but overall it is a good thing because it means that in the end, once everyone adapts, we will be using the same module system everywhere. On the web, in Node.js, and in any other tool that is using JavaScript, everyone will agree on using ECMAScript modules. So it's a win for the whole ecosystem. But as we speak, we are sort of in the transition period. There are many things that still consider ECMAScript modules to be experimental. The support isn't really 100%. We are in the process of changing things. And that is true of Kill the Newsletter as well. This file is not the one that was used when we last built and deployed Kill the Newsletter. Back then, I was using CommonJS. So we were generating JavaScript for Node.js using CommonJS. Now we are going to be using ECMAScript modules, and you say that you want to use ECMAScript modules by saying that you want to use a certain version of ES, where ES stands for ECMAScript, which is the standard for the JavaScript language. So that's how you say that you want to use ECMAScript modules, not only on the code you write, because we were writing the code in TypeScript using ECMAScript modules, but now we will be generating code in ECMAScript modules as well. And the reason why that matters is that, first, it is the future, that's how we want to do things, but also there are some tools, once we start updating the dependencies on the project, that will have been modified to only support ECMAScript modules. The ecosystem is starting to transition and some things are not backwards compatible. So if we want to be able to use every updated package, as we do want to use the updated things, then we will run into issues if we are not only writing in ECMAScript modules, but also producing JavaScript that is using that standard. And we do want to use the latest versions of every dependency, because check this out, there are 34 warnings, or I guess it's not even warnings, it's like critical issues with the dependencies. We must update everything to the latest. Oh, it seems like we don't have 34 because some of these are applying to old versions that were in those tags that I showed you before. But still, there are at least 2 in Node.js in the NPM ecosystem that we need to update. And perhaps if I try and update some of these dependencies, it will not work because it's not using ECMAScript. So now we will be using ECMAScript modules. Great. Next, there is this notion of how to resolve modules. Oh my God, modules. This setting is about how you take an import that looks like this, for instance. It's just importing mail parser from mail parser. It's a bare identifier. How do you go from this name to the correct module, the correct file in the correct module, and so on? There are different ways of going about this. You can use an import map on the browser. You can use the Node resolution system in Node.js, which is based on the file system. It will look for a Node modules folder. There are different ways of going about this. There are different ways to translate this name into a particular file that you need to load. So we have to say to TypeScript, I want to use the latest. I want to use the newest. I want to use the latest and greatest. There are different ways of going about this. You can use the classic mode, which is the old way TypeScript used to work. No, I want to use the Node module resolution, and I want to use the latest version you have of that. Yeah, I am running things on the bleeding edge. Sometimes I do get cut, but for the most part, it's fine. It's fine. Yeah. Then there is this setting that is super strange, but it is recommended, and it also has to do with the resolution of modules, as you can tell by the name, module. And this is to enable interoperability between ECMAScript modules when they have default exports. I will not get into this too deeply, but the TypeScript used to do this thing to try and resolve default imports. Wasn't the best way of doing things. They decided to implement something different and better, but in the process of doing that, and I think that this was in particular with CommonJS modules. Anyway, they came up with this new way of doing things, but it would be backwards incompatible, so they created it under this flag, and then you have to set this flag. There is a blog post going into this in more detail, but I will not reiterate everything here. Then libraries that TypeScript needs to be aware of. So I'm using the latest language version that I can. So I want everything that is built into the language I want to have available to me. And I don't think I need this for this project, but we'll see. But these are just so in case we write any kind of code that sort of looks like it would belong in the browser, we have access to those APIs as well, even though not all browser APIs are available in Node.js. So one thing to be aware of when you're writing JavaScript is that it is just one language, but the way that your program is going to be interpreted is so dependent on where that language is being run. There are so many environments, from Node.js to the browser, different browsers, Dino, how do you even pronounce that? That thing. So many different ways of running JavaScript. They will all have slightly different ways of doing things. It's weird to me that this is showing my face, but I am supposed to be on my screen. Am I on my screen like I should be? I am. Weird. Nero is here. Hello, what's up? Off topic, but can you point me towards resources with help to understand the discrete Fourier transform? I can point you at two sources, Nero. The first is on this very channel, search for discrete Fourier transform, search for Fourier under this channel. I did a stream in which I implemented the discrete Fourier transform from scratch with no magical background in mathematics necessary. So you can see an implementation from scratch and I explain how it works in the process of implementing it. So I think it is a great resource. I'm really happy with how everything went on that stream. It went really well. We were able to get a working implementation and I explained how it worked in a way that I think makes sense without understanding the mathematics of it. It is all about trying to find like strings that resonate with at certain frequencies. It's a very nice analogy that I got from somewhere. But really the way that I learned this in the first place was from many sources, but mostly the DSP guide. So it's a book that you can read online and it explains all of these concepts around the Fourier transform, the discrete Fourier transform, the DTFT, so the discrete time Fourier transform, the windows you can use when doing the Fourier transform so that you don't get weird artifacts just by using a rectangular window. It also talks about the other kinds of windows like Blackman-Harris and Hen and that kind of thing. So yeah, it's a great book. I keep recommending it because it's really good. So yeah, so I recommend. Give my stream a try. And if you don't like that, go to the DSP guide. Or even if you like that, still go to the DSP guide. Okay, and Mage is pointing out that yes, you can just use the command line tool for the TypeScript compiler, TSC, TypeScript compiler. And it does have this init flag, which creates a tsconfig file with comments on the settings, and that's good. I think that I started with that, but it isn't the only thing I looked into. I looked into that. I also looked into the this repository. I don't know how to pronounce this person's name. Sindre Sohors, maybe. Don't know how to pronounce their name, but they are awesome. Any package that they do, it's just amazing. Super responsive when issues come up and super accessible. Great person. Pushing forward what you can do in ECMAScript modules because they were one of the first people to convert modules to ECMAScript. Anyway, I also looked into this as a reference as well. It's not a one-to-one copy and paste. There are some things that I don't need, but it was inspiration for me as well. Yeah, sure thing. I hope you like it. Right, continuing with this. This actually came up recently because I was using one package by this very person. And it was this person who pointed out that I could be using this line. Interesting, huh? So I was using this package called got, which we may or may not use in Kill the Newsletter as well. Oh, I'm searching for got on the wrong place. Repositories. Yes, that. I was using this package, so you see same person. And I couldn't compile my code. And it was because of this package. Turns out that it wasn't because of this package, it was because of a dependency of this package, which was out of date for various reasons. The types were wrong. So I learned about this, and it turns out that I like this. What it does is it tries to check your code, but it does not try to check the dependencies themselves. As it turns out, I kind of like that, because the alternative is it checks even the dependencies, it checks even the types of the dependencies. And in many cases, I guess perhaps that would be advantageous because you're doing an even stricter checks in terms of types. But it turns out that there are these packages that are ever so slightly broken type-wise, but function just perfectly. And then TypeScript is complaining about the dependency, and it's not your code. So you have to go and get into someone else's project and try to submit a pull request, or you have to ask them to update things, and you have to ask them to get a new release. It is a bit much. And in many cases, that's good because you're pushing the whole environment forward and you're contributing back to open source. But sometimes that's not what you want. So, and perhaps it also makes things marginally faster because it's fewer things to check for. I don't know. But in essence, the way that this works is every package publishes not only the code, the JavaScript, but also publishes the types. And what this is saying is trust the types published by the package blindly. Don't check them. Just take them as truth. And then typically that prevents some kinds of compilation errors, makes things marginally faster, but gives you even fewer guarantees about the correctness of your code. That's the trade-off, right? A type system is supposed to give you some guarantees about your code in the sense that it will not crash in certain ways at runtime. And when you enable these sorts of features, you are sort of opting out of some of these checks. And in TypeScript, there are all these holes in the type system that were designed to be that way because they want you to be able to turn things off to progress when necessary. JavaScript can be a messy language. Right, next we have target, and that is sort of a similar thing to module. As you can tell, the value of the configuration is the same. So while this was talking specifically about the module system used in the generated code, this is talking about the other language features in the generated code. So for instance, relatively recently, the nullish coalescing operator was introduced in JavaScript, the double question mark. And you could set the target as an old version of JavaScript, and then you could write your TypeScript with the nullish coalescing operator, but the generated code would not be using it. So you would write code that reads like this, and it would generate code that reads like that. Something like that. Oh, I guess it's hello here. Something like that, right? So you can sort of take this shorthand and expand that into this, and that's what that flag would do. It would tell the compiler, please generate older JavaScript. I'm not interested in that. I want to use the latest JavaScript features because I tend to be using the latest Node.js versions. So that's what this is. So as you can see, this is inputs and outputs, and this whole section is about language features. It's all about how to interpret the code coming in and how to generate the code going out. These are like flags for the compiler that modify the outputs and the way, the shape of the language coming out. I really loved the way you explained EQs, so I will definitely watch your stream. Thanks. Thanks for the nice words. I really appreciate it. I said this before, I'll say it again. It's not common that people go out of their way to say thanks to someone on the web. I like many things, from books to music to content creators to streamers, and I don't say thanks. So I really appreciate you saying that. Yeah, the GFT is one of my, it's one of my favorite streams. I really liked that one. And the EQs are really good. I enjoyed it a lot too. If they're good or not good, that's subjective, but I enjoyed them a lot, and I enjoyed the GFT too. And by the way, I usually say these things to people like, oh, I have a stream about this, I have a stream about that, you should go check this out, you should go check that out, but I don't always send the links. I wonder if people have problems finding these things. So Nero, if you try to get to this stream and you fail to, let me know. I don't know how difficult it is actually. If I go to my own YouTube channel, how difficult would it be to find this stream? If I look for like Fourier, something like, yeah, well, I guess these are relevant. This is not relevant. There is no talk about Fourier transforms here. And probably this is not relevant either. But yeah, I think that this was the stream in which I started things. And I think that there was some small issue and then I fixed it here. So yeah, searching is not so bad. I think you will be able to find it. Mage says, I think it's ES6 if the code targets the browser rather than the V6 engine. Yeah, I'm not sure what you're talking about. If you're talking about this, it does not matter all that much if you are running in the browser or in Node.js. Because, for instance, the knowledge coalescing operator, the one that is the double question mark, was introduced in, I don't remember which version, like it was introduced in ECMAScript 2000X. It goes by year, right? So 2022, for instance. It was introduced in 2000X. And then when the browsers start implementing that and when Node starts implementing that, it will be all the same. It's a language feature, not something that has to do with the libraries and that sort of thing. But you could be more conservative. You could say something like, I want only up to that version. And this is frozen in time. But then I would have to remember to come back here and update this frequently. And I have not run into any issues declaring that I want to be on the latest. So that's what I tend to do. And what I tend to do in my projects is to lock the version of Node.js along with the code that was produced using Cache, as we will see in the future streams. And when you do that, it's fine. As long as it is working, it will not break in the future. Only when you try to build again, it may break. And you're saying V6, but isn't the name of the JavaScript engine in Chrome V8? Yeah, that's what I remembered. It's not. I think you mean V8, or is there a V6 JavaScript engine? No, I think it's V8. Whatever. So all of this was about how to interpret the program coming in and how to generate a program going out. Then we have, what do you want to generate? I want to generate the JavaScript, and I don't have to say that I want to generate the JavaScript. That's the default. There is no way of well, there are ways. You can always have a compiler flag for that. TypeScript is really flexible, but there is no point in not generating the JavaScript. But I want to generate some other things beyond the JavaScript. I want to generate a declaration map, which is mostly useful for libraries. And this is an application, which is not quite the same. So the declaration isn't super necessary, but I generated it as a kind of a standard. I always do. And this is just a file that declares the types. So before I said that this was taking the other libraries types as the truth, this is how I generate that kind of truth from my code base. I also generate these maps both for declarations as well as for the source. And the map is just literally a map between the generated code and the original code that I put in. And that's helpful when you have some sort of error message with a line number, with a file name, that can be translated using the source map from the actual JavaScript that ran into the error back to the TypeScript that I wrote. So that's the usefulness of these source maps. And then lastly, I turn on strict, which is a type system thing, which is saying, please try to be as strict as possible when doing the type checking. So if you have any kind of, I guess there are no errors that TypeScript would ignore if it wasn't for this flag, some kind of access by null variables. I think that if you want to have exhaustive switch clauses, this also comes into play. So I don't remember all the specifics, but again, as a matter of course, I always enable this strict because I want to have as many checks as possible, as long as they're feasible, as long as they're not preventing me from doing the work. I love TypeScript because of this, because it allows you to navigate the productivity versus strictness kind of deal. Yes, V8, okay. Okay, so that is the TypeScript configuration. Now let's go into package.json. This is the file that creates the package itself, that specifies the name, the version, and everything about the package. And we have to revisit this. First, I want to open the package file for my application that I work on as my day job. And I want to compare, because recently I changed I know it's such a petty thing, but I changed the order of the declarations so that they would make more sense when you're just reading them. If you open the file on GitHub, for instance. So name and version and description. I think that is okay. And then keywords, because that makes more sense to be right after the description. And then homepage. Do I even have that here? I do. And perhaps the homepage for this one could be the actual website. That's the domain, right? It's .com. Yes, it is .com. Then the repository, at some point I was using this shorthand, which NPM recognizes as being a GitHub repository, but it opted out of that because if you are just reading this on a text editor, it is nice to have the full address. Then bugs, then the author, and then the license. And then the things that we want to, oh, I guess I'm missing funding. That should go, I think, after the license. Let me open real quick another project in which I have funding. Because this is my day job, it doesn't have the funding thing. But in Caixa we do. Yeah, it goes right after bugs. And now this order is consistent in every project that I work on. It's one of those things that I care about and no one else would care about, but I care about. So next is the things that we export. And in this case, back in, well, I guess 2021, back last year when I implemented this last time, I thought about allowing you to use Kill the Newsletter as part of a larger Node.js application. So there were all these extensibility points. I'm not sure if anyone ever used that. It is a bit of a burden to maintain, and it can be a security problem, because if you are running under the same domain but under different paths, one application could interfere with the cookies of another. It's a whole story. In essence, I am no longer going to support you being able to just import Kill the Newsletter into a bigger Node.js application. I'm no longer going to treat Kill the Newsletter as a library of sorts. It used to be both an application and a library. Now we are going to completely embrace the fact that it is an application. It's not a library. You cannot build it as part of another Node.js application. You cannot customize it using that sort of infrastructure. So the solution for that is to just take this out. We will have, however, a binary. But because the binary is the name of the package, I don't need to give it a name like this. I can just do that. And we are changing from distribution, which I used to use as the name of the build directory, to build. And I will be generating am.js files because we are switching from CommonJS to ECMAScript modules. ECMAScript 6 is fully supported in Safari 15. True, and ECMAScript 6 is fully supported pretty much everywhere. You can sort of pretend that ECMAScript 6 is pervasive. You can sort of pretend that most of the latest JavaScript features are pervasive. You can sort of work under that assumption because every browser auto-updates these days. And you are in control of Node.js. You can update Node.js if you want. So I tend to use the latest. You'll notice this trend. And it's something that happens often in the JavaScript community. People just use the latest. Right, then next we will have some scripts, some dependencies, and I will take this out. We used to use Jest for testing. I have a different infrastructure for testing these days, so I will not be using Jest. Now let's look into the scripts real quick. Or maybe not. I'm running out of time, actually. And I have talked for a lot and covered a couple topics, so let's commit what we have and continue next time. So we changed super basic things, but we got into the mood of working on this project, which is the most important thing, right? The hardest part of going out for a run is putting on your shoes. That's the hardest part. And we put our shoes on today. Moving forward, the plan will be that I will be back to my auto mixer, the parameters, all that JS effects, good stuff that we have been talking about a lot this year. In fact, I think I will be doing that tomorrow. I think that tomorrow will be JS effects. And then I will be alternating. Some days JS effects, some days JavaScript. But we have a deadline. We need to be done by this date, because then my killthenewsletter.com, the current certificate, will expire on the 7th. We have a solid month, but this will expire, and when it expires, it will not renew. And when it doesn't renew, we will lose the padlock. And for me, that's a deal breaker. There's no way I'm going to let this application run without HTTPS. So we have a deadline on this little project of renovating Kill the Newsletter. And JS Effects will also find its way into the streams, probably tomorrow. You see what I do when I create the stream, and it will show up on your YouTube timeline. For the time being, thanks to Mage, Nero, and Bo for joining me on the chat. You are great. I suppose it's just me, as my phone is hacked with a custom Android, and I have to sideload this new stuff myself. Oh, yeah. I have had a couple people who run Linux on the desktop or some esoteric systems like yourself that don't auto-update. They are lagging behind on some JavaScript features. As long as it degrades gracefully, I'm okay. On the server, I don't have to care at all because I'm in complete control over the Node.js version, so I'm in complete control over the JavaScript version that we will be running and what features we will have. In terms of browser support, as long as it breaks in a graceful manner, I'm fine. If you don't see the right color somewhere, the right spacing somewhere, or this feature that is inconsequential is missing or misbehaving, I'm fine with that. If it's a complete deal breaker, then I sometimes implement things in a more backwards compatible way. That tends to be my attitude. I tend to build stuff for the latest and greatest within reason. Right, so thank you to Mage, Nero, and Bo. It's great having you here. And I see you again tomorrow, probably for some JS effects. Make sure to tune in tomorrow. All right, thanks to everyone who supports me on PayPal and PayPal and Patreon and these sorts of things. Yeah, see you tomorrow. Bye. Thank you for watching the stream. You know how great it has been. Or maybe it sucked, and I am glad that you stuck with me. And soon we'll all will be back together for some more coding or talking or chilling. The next time I'll be streaming.